Welcome back to Lungcast, the monthly respiratory health podcast series from the American Lung Association and medical news site hcplive.com. I'm your host, Dr. Albert Rizzo, the Chief Medical Officer for the American Lung Association. Before we introduce our topic and our guest today, just a reminder that Lungcast is available on all your favorite streaming platforms. Subscribe to @Lungcast on YouTube to get new and archived episodes, as well as interview segments and episode highlights as they come out. A link to the show page, as well as the ALA and HCP Live homepages for Lungcast, can be found in each episode description. And for those of you who prefer a podcast, you can subscribe to Lungcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite listening platforms. You can also register for more respiratory news and insights at both lung.org and hcplive.com. Our topic today is one that has been a source of discussion about our health for many years, and that is the role of our diet and nutrition. Today, we are going to focus on the role of nutrition in respect to our gut's microbiome. First, let me clarify a few terms. Microbes, which can include bacteria, viruses, fungi, etc., colonize our intestines. The colonies they live in are called the microbiota of our intestines. But what the microbiota does in terms of the metabolic functions, the genetic output, how it protects us and has physiologic and structural functions, particularly with regard to our immune system, is what is referred to as the microbiome. Recent studies have suggested that the intestinal microbiome plays an important role in modulating risk of several chronic diseases, including inflammatory bowel disease, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. At the same time, it is now understood that diet plays a significant role in shaping the microbiome. Experiments showing that dietary alterations can induce large temporary microbial shifts within 24 hours. Given this association, there may be significant therapeutic utility in altering our gut microbiome through diet. But you say this is a Lungcast. What does the gut have to do with the lungs, and how does it impact chronic diseases of the lung? There is something called the lung-gut axis. The respiratory tract has long been considered sterile up until about the last 15 to 20 years. The first culture-independent study confirming the presence of lung microbiome was published back in 2010 by Marcus Hilty and his colleagues while studying airways of asthmatic individuals, and this debunked the sterile lung dogma. We know now that the airways have a dynamic microbial ecosystem. Unlike the intestinal microbiota, the lower respiratory tract is one of the least populated sites by microorganisms in the human body. Its composition is dependent on microbial colonization of the upper respiratory tract through salivary microinhalations, interactions with the host's immune system, and environmental conditions. We know the intestine and lungs develop in parallel after birth, with constant communication between these two compartments, with the bacteria most common in the lower respiratory tract being the same as those in the intestine. To inform us more on the role of our gut and lung microbiome, and importantly how our diet and nutrition can impact it, is our guest today, Dr. Neal Barnard. Dr. Barnard is an adjunct professor of medicine at the George Washington University School of Medicine in Washington, D.C., and has led numerous research studies investigating the effects of diet on diabetes, body weight, hormonal symptoms, and chronic pain, including a groundbreaking study of dietary interventions in type 2 diabetes funded by the National Institutes of Health. That study paved the way for viewing type 2 diabetes as a potentially reversible condition for many patients. Dr. Barnard has authored more than 100 scientific publications and 20 books for medical and lay readers, and is the editor-in-chief of the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, a textbook made available to all United States medical students. As president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, Dr. Barnard also leads programs for advocating for preventive medicine, good nutrition, and higher ethical standards in research. His research contributed to the acceptance of plant-based diets in the dietary guidelines for Americans. I'm pleased to have him weigh in on the topic of nutrition and its potential impact on lung health and chronic lung diseases.
It's good to be with you today. Thank you for the kind invitation.
Thank you. So before we speak specifically about the lungs, when during your career did you develop the interest in and then devote your research to the important role that nutrition plays in our general well-being and how it contributes to other chronic diseases that you have studied?
Well, the big turning point really was more than 2 decades ago. our research team was given a grant by the National Institutes of Health to look at in this case, type 2 diabetes. And what we discovered didn't initially seem to have anything to do with the lung health at all. The whole idea was, could we improve type 2 diabetes management? And so we discovered was that when we took out of the diet the fatty foods, meats, dairy products, greasy, fatty foods, something happened. Fat started to dissipate from the muscle cells and the liver cells, which we can see through MR spectroscopy. We could see that fat going away. When that happened, insulin sensitivity improved, or insulin resistance went away, and diabetes control became much, much more effective. People needed less medicine, sometimes none at all. Sometimes the disease went away completely. Anyway, among the worst of these foods that had to go were what we would call processed meats, hot dogs, bacon, salami, that kind of stuff. And at the same time, other researchers were saying, well, wait a minute. When we look at lung conditions, COPD, there were two big studies that came out in 2007, one at Columbia, one at Harvard. Both of them looked at large groups of people, and they found that in both cases, although the big driver we think of for COPD is smoking, of course, in this case, they found that if you looked at diet, people eating the most processed meats had more than double the risk of COPD compared to others. Now, how could that be? How could eating a hot dog give me COPD? And the answer seemed to be the nitrites that are used as a preservative and also as sort of a flavoring and coloring in a lot of these products seems to cause the production of reactive oxygen species, free radicals, if you will, which can damage the very tender tissues of the lung. So we wanted to get rid of those foods because of diabetes, and others have said, well, wait, if we get rid of that, that'll be good for a person. Let's say a person quits smoking, they're fragile, and you want to help them more than just abstinence of tobacco. By changing their diet, you might be able to help them more. And for everybody who's at risk for lung disease, it may well be that that's one step. So there's a lot more to it than that. But that was kind of the introduction of the good heavens. Diet is somehow changing the environment of the pulmonary tissue.
Sounds like a great idea to start with.
Mhm.
So let's go back to the lung a little more. The alveolar membrane is the largest surface area of the body, and it's in contact with the external environment, and it's continuously exposed to a wide variety of microbes and organic and inorganic particles. And this constant exposure requires immunologic mechanisms to tolerate the innocuous particles that are inhaled, while also defending us against the microbial products or pathogens that enter our lungs. Now, this complex interaction between airway epithelial cells and immune cells, together with chemokines and soluble proteins, shapes the outcome of host pathogen interaction, which is often inflammation within the airway microbiome, and thus can be impacted by the lung gut axis. Lung diseases, like you mentioned, COPD, asthma, bronchiectasis, all have a component of inflammation in the airways. We also know that the chronic airway inflammation is a significant risk factor for lung cancer. So the role of our immune system in our lungs and airways, the long-reaching immune impact of our gut microbiota is now being recognized, especially on the pulmonary immune system. I want to mention, for example, the Binational Early Asthma and Microbiome Study, or BEAMS, being run by the University of Arizona Asthma and Airway Disease Research Center. It's being performed to determine which are the environmental microbes and their products present in the border city of Nogales, Mexico, that cause children born there to have 4 times less asthma than Mexican-American children born in Tucson, Arizona, just 70 miles north of the border. This study will also determine the difference into microbial communities present in stools at both sides of the border and the immune responses that asthma-protective microbes induce in children, with the goal of using all this information to find ways to prevent asthma in the future. Dr. Barnard, since we are born with essentially a sterile gut and airway, please explain a little bit more the mechanisms that contribute to the development and composition of our personal microbiomes.
I think it's good to think of your gut or your lungs or any part of your body where bacteria or fungi or viruses are going to eventually take root. Think of it in two ways. One is like a garden, you have seeds, the seeds that can be planted, but you also have a soil that can either cause those seeds to flourish or to die out. If you have, you're trying to grow roses you need a certain kind of soil. If you want to grow cactus, the garden store is going to sell you a completely different soil to grow it in. Okay, so your gut. You're having all kinds of things go down your gut. Bacteria, fungi, viruses, anything you ingest, you swallow, goes down your esophagus, sooner or later it's going to end up in the gut. And we learned a long time ago that if your diet is kind of the typical meaty diet that I grew up with North Dakota, grew up with in North Dakota, that's the kind of thing that it causes a selection for the bacteria that tend to survive to be those bacteria that are associated with colorectal cancer. If, on the other hand, I had been raised in a family that really ate lots of vegetables and fruits and so forth, the high fiber foods provide a certain soil, if you will, that allows healthier bacterial populations to flourish. So in the lungs, what have you got? Do you have seeds? You sure do. I'm using seeds as an analogy for all the stuff that we inhale. And as you mentioned, the higher up you go, the more populous they are, in the mouth and in the nose and so forth. And the colonies are less and less numerous the lower down you go. But we are inhaling bacteria, fungi, viruses. Those are the big three. But the other thing is, what is the soil? Well, the soil can be the bloodstream that nourishes the alveoli and whatever then they're imparting to them. Are they imparting lots of antioxidants, for example? But it can also be secretions. Let's say you have a person who is consuming a lot of dairy products and all day long they're kind of clearing their throat and so forth. What they're trying to clear is secretions, which can create a certain kind of soil, if you will, for the growth of certain kinds of bacteria, which is why we see oftentimes people with asthma seem to do better when they get away from dairy. By the way, in this case, it's not the dairy hormones, it's not the dairy fat necessarily. It could well be the dairy protein to which they are reacting. But in each case, you've got seeds, meaning the infectious organisms, and then you've got the soil. But I have to say that just what you said, Dr. Rizzo, is so important. We used to think everything was sterile. I'm sorry to tell you, though, the gut is not sterile, the lungs are not sterile, and perhaps most worrisome of all, the brain is not sterile. We started seeing over the past 15, 20 years that our problem was just lack of the ability to detect small organisms. Now, with PCR and other mechanisms, we can see viruses in the brain. Herpes viruses are very common in the trigeminal cells. Then from there, they migrate into the brain. So that's what we have to live with. But if our diet is a healthful diet, we are selected for good immunity and for hopefully casting out the more pathogenic microorganisms.
Great. So once we get this gut microbiome, can you comment on some of the factors that impact the microbiome, both in maybe a good way and also a bad way? And I'm referring to the role of antibiotic use and also the role of pro and prebiotics that are popular in the over-the-counter form.
So important that you mentioned that. Most people have had the idea correctly that antibiotics can knock out your microbiome. They can. You can kill them off. And so that has led to the well-meaning but ill-informed advice to, after your antibiotic course is finished, you should go to the store and get some probiotics, which is just a highfalutin word for bacterial cultures or fungal cultures, which you're then going to pay a fair amount for at the cashier to repopulate your gut. And that sort of works, except that researchers found it really doesn't help any more than not taking them. What matters more is the soil, if you will. So let's say a person had a urinary infection or a pneumonia or whatever it was. They took a course of antibiotics. If our diet is rich in fiber, the high fiber foods allow the natural bacteria that are coming in, the healthiest ones, to propagate. Best choices for fiber, number one is the legume group. That's beans, peas, lentils, top of the list. The second is vegetables. So this is where our mothers wanted us to have broccoli, and she was right. Below that, I would say fruits, and the bottom, still good, is whole grains. The reason I put it that way is everyone thinks, well, whole grain cereal, that's got to be the high fiber food. That's the most extensively advertised food. But the top of the list are the beans that our grandparents knew about, but kids these days probably would see them in a museum.
Got it. So to emphasize what we're talking about, in March of this year, the European Lung Foundation introduced nutrition as the latest theme within their Healthy Lungs for Life campaign. They launched a new information resource on nutrition, highlighting its important role in lung health. The related infographic to this campaign contains a colorful image that says to, quote, eat the colors of the rainbow, end quote. And in one of your books, Your Body in Balance, I believe in chapter 12, you likewise talk about the way colors can identify the right foods to eat. I believe you have conducted a number of trials examining the effects of diet on the gut microbiome, and this may impact the recommendations of some of the dietary choices. But could you speak to the importance of encouraging fiber intake specifically, which I think you've already mentioned quite strongly?
Yes. Yeah. It really is a combination of things. Fiber is theoretically a huge part of our diet, and I've already mentioned beans and vegetables and fruits is really providing them. Very important. Animal products do not have fiber. So many of us grew up in a culture of cheese and meat and so forth. None of those foods has any fiber at all. It comes only from plants. You spoke of color. Color allows us perhaps to choose, in some ways, the best of the best. We have photoreceptors in our eyes that can detect antioxidants. Sounds funny to say, but that red color of a tomato, you could see it at 200 yards from, and so you walk inside the grocery store, you could see the lycopene inside a tomato. You could see the beta carotene in the carrots and sweet potatoes. Those are all carotenoids that are life-saving. And I have sometimes thought that our color vision, which say cats don't have, that we may have evolved it so that we would be able to recognize the foods that are most helpful for us. So lycopene is red, beta carotene is orange. It's in mangoes and papayas and all kinds of things. And then the blue color of blueberries or strawberries get a certain kind of red that comes from what are called anthocyanins. All of these are powerful antioxidants, and if we select them, put them in our grocery cart, they are going to help us to knock out free radicals, to reduce inflammatory processes, and they circulate in the blood and they're protective in a great many ways.
Very interesting and very clearly explained. Thank you. So, in our preparation for this interview, you mentioned that some of the recent articles specifically discussing nutrition and COVID and COPD. Could you share your thoughts on these issues with our listeners?
With COVID, when the disease came in, I mean, it's frankly, it wasn't that long ago. Remember, it was what, you know, 5, 6 years ago, we started to see this disease come in, and nobody had a clue. It took some time to identify the virus that caused it and to understand the susceptibilities and so forth. But what came to be clear is that different people who would be infected with the coronavirus did not die at equal rates. And what we started to see is that there were a number of contributors to it. The first thing we found is that if you're more overweight, you're more likely to succumb to COVID. You can have severe COVID, you're more likely to die. If you had diabetes, same story. But then people backed up even another step. And there were two huge studies. There was something called the COVID-19 symptom studies, 500,000 participants. And what they showed is that the more your diet was plant-based, the kind of diet that we know is heart healthy, um, if the more your diet was plant-based, the more likely you were to do well if you got COVID. And then there was also a large study of healthcare workers published right around the same time that showed that similarly, if you were on a more plant-based diet, it doesn't really stop you from getting COVID. I mean, you're likely to inhale. If you inhale that virus, you're going to get sick. Um, but the likelihood of getting severe COVID was much less. And for all those people on a low carb diet or a ketogenic diet or an Atkins diet, they did much worse. The people on a high protein, low carbohydrate diet were much more likely to have severe COVID. So plant-based, lower risk, meaty diets, higher risk. And that kind of fit in with this pattern that we're seeing with diabetes, with cardiovascular disease, even Alzheimer's disease nowadays. We're seeing that when people are on diets that are more plant-based, it doesn't wipe out these risks, but it makes them uh, less a part of our lives.
Got it. So, unlike some positions held by the current administration, such as on vaccines, the focus on food safety and nutrition seems to enjoy support of many physicians and experts in the field. Some credit Secretary Kennedy for shining a brighter spotlight on some food and nutrition issues that have long been recognized by experts in the field already. He has recently called on more robust nutrition courses in medical schools to maintain federal funding. Could I ask your views on the current medical school curriculum regarding nutrition?
When I was in medical school at the George Washington University School of Medicine, terrific school, may I say, great curriculum in every respect. But when it came to nutrition, we could trace out the structure of vitamin C and talk about scurvy, but we didn't really have any idea of what to say to a person who had hypertension or type 2 diabetes and what dietary changes could make it go away. So the practical aspects were lost and they need to come back. We also need to be a little bit more nuanced in things. I'm sorry to say that today we're sort of ruled by trends and sometimes subjective things, like we're beating up all day long on processed foods. And that's been unfortunate because researchers at Harvard and elsewhere found that certain processed foods actually reduce the risk of disease, while others do increase the risk. Case in point, 2023 study at Harvard showed that if you're eating these processed meats, the same things that contribute to COPD, if you're eating those, you have a 44% increased risk of type 2 diabetes if you're eating them regularly. But if you're eating, say, a processed breakfast cereal, and you pour your soy milk on it, that's associated with about a 20% reduction in risk of diabetes. And the plant-based snacks, same story. So I am worried that sometimes in medicine, although we're very demanding with regard to evidence in certain respects, when it comes to diet, sometimes we're kind of offhand and subjective, and we really need to look at where the science is taking us. And it really is suggesting that the more we bring 4 food groups into our lives, the grains, the beans, the vegetables, the fruits, the better off we're going to do. And the more we sort of break up with the animal products that a lot of us grew up with, and certainly I did, the more we break up with those foods and learn a better way to do it. Not only are we going to be healthier, but we're going to be more knowledgeable in advising our patients.
Great message. So I know this is a large topic to cover in a short podcast, but you've done a great job of giving us a base of knowledge to work from. Are there any other particular points you'd like to make before we close?
Just 2 quick things. When we're talking with patients about a healthy diet, doctors will typically say, I don't have time for all that. I got 15 minutes. That's true. And you shouldn't be the one to do the diet counseling. All you have to do as a physician is let the patient know that it matters and then hand them off to your registered dietitian who is the expert and can meet with the patient and their reluctant spouse and talk with them about healthy foods. And they can provide them knowledge and ongoing support, and they're going to be your partners in medical care.
Thank you again for another piece of good advice. So
Thank you.
thank you again for taking the time today and raising important awareness of the role of nutrition for our general health and our lung health. To our listeners, if you want to hear more regarding all things respiratory related, we have a great archive of discussions on our show feeds. Be sure again to subscribe and rate Lungcast on your preferred listening or watching platform, and visit lung.org and hcplive.com for more news and resources. Until next time, I'm Dr. Albert Rizzo reminding you that if you can't breathe, nothing else matters.